We've talked about using the unit circle in order to figure out the cosine and sine and tangent values within that unit circle. But sometimes you're given that and you have to find the angle measure based on what you've been given. This is what we call inverse trig functions. So you're going to have to use that unit circle once again, unless it's not an angle measure isn't on that unit circle, then you can use your calculator, but most of this will be within our unit circle. So for instance, they will give you something that looks like cosine of theta equals -1/2. Okay, so we know that cosine is on the left side, and we're looking for something that has that -1/2 on the left side of our coordinate. Okay, so if I'm doing that, I'm just going to go through and look for where I have a -1/2. I have a -1/2 on the left side here, as well as here. Since I found those locations, I then need to go and find the radian measure or the degree measure, depending on what they're asking for. When we're doing this on your unit circle, you have the negative measures. We always want to use the positive measure. So theta in this case is going to equal 4 pi over 3 and also at 2 pi over 3. So notice we have two different values, and that's okay. Sometimes you'll be given one value. If you have 0 or 2 pi, you'll obviously have a little bit more there because it's one point together. Now, sometimes this gets a little bit more intense in the fact that you have to simplify it a little bit first before using that unit circle. I'm actually just going to write down the example here first, and then I will go back to that unit circle. Anyway, let's say that I have, and let's not do sine. Let's do tangent squared of theta equals 3. So we've got a little bit of an issue here because we have a square. In order to get rid of a square, we have to square root. Not that big of a deal. Okay, but when we square root, you are going to get the positive and negative value of whatever your side happens to be. So if I'm looking at this, I have tangent of theta equals plus and minus square root 3. So I'm going to go back to my actual unit circle here so I can actually look at it. So I'm looking for, oh, I don't have the tangent values on here. But you're going to be looking for wherever on your unit circle that tangent equals square root 3 positive or negative. So you should have that unit circle yourself. Sorry, just trying to find mine. So we would find, ooh, didn't want a highlighter, my bad. We would then find theta is going to be pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and at 5 pi over 3. So we happen to have 4 answers, and that's okay. So you're just going to solve this algebraically until you get it down to something that is going to get you to a tangent or sine or cosine or something of that nature where you can use it based on your unit circle. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky in the sense that, remember, we have 6 different trig functions. Sometimes we have sine, cosine, tangent, but we also have cosecant, secant, and cotangent. So let's look at one of those. Let's say that I am given, let's not go with secant, actually that's fine. Secant theta equals 2 square root of 3 over 3. Okay. Well, looking at this, we are going to have to remember that secant relates to cosine. It relates to cosine if it's flipped. So this now becomes 3 divided by 2 square root 3. Okay, when we do this, you cannot have a square root in your denominator. So we're going to have to rationalize that denominator. Okay. This now gives me 3 square root 3 over 2 times 3. If I look at that, 3's cancel out. I'm looking for square root 3 over 2. So where does cosine equal square root 3 over 2? Going back to my unit circle, I can now use my unit circle, silly fish. Cosine is again on the left. So my answer is going to be at pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. So just something to note that you might be given, you know, one of those functions that's not on the unit circle, but you will be expected to flip it and find it based off of that. So that's a kind of gist of our inverse trig functions and how to find them basically using your unit circle.